Hey everybody, this is Joel with Backroad Builds. Welcome back to the next episode of the Backyard Bar. Today I'm going to be working on a tractor hood table along with some stools to go with it. The first thing I need to do though is get the table finished to set my height. Now in order to do that, you can't just go out and buy a metal frame, set this hood on and bolt it down and you're done. So there's a little bit of thought and some fabrication that goes into it. What I'd like to do is build a framework that'll go underneath the hood. It'll attach to that end, which will allow me to bolt that to a wall to make that secure. Then I'll also need to come up with some brackets on that end and something through the front here, whether I come through this hole or the sides, that'll hold the top on here. Once that's on, that'll establish the height for the table, which will then tell me how long the legs need to be. So let's get back to the shop and get this project started. I have the hood set up on my table upside down here so I can kind of see what's going on and how I can figure out how to make the bracketry that's going to hold this up. So as I'm looking at this, on the back here I see there's a couple of holes that I believe we could utilize. I could put some angle iron on there and that will help bolt it to the wall. But I also noticed that on the way up to the front, the brackets that are on the inside that I kind of need to use to help support this hood, up in front, we're probably just eyeballing it about an inch shorter than back here. So I'm gonna have to figure out what I need to do there, what that height difference is. But I think just to get going on it, I'm gonna come back here, we'll measure what I need for a bracket here, we'll get this cut, drilled, and put in place, and that'll help us continue on with those pieces. So if I come across the top, I'm looking at just using the flat part here. So it kind of rounds in the corners, but as I come across the top here, 17.5 inches will work good for my width, and we're probably about 15 7/8 for the holes center to center. So I'm going to take these measurements, I'm going to head over and cut that out, drill the holes, and we'll get this mounted to continue on. So I got the angle iron cut that I'm going to use back here. I wound up going with 1.5 inches, and it's an 1/8 inch thick. I think that'll be plenty strong to hold up the back. What I'm going to do here is just add some hardware to hold it in place so I can get the rest of my measurements. Now I'm not going to take and tighten these down with wrenches. There's really no need for that. As long as it's good and finger tight and will stay in place, that should be good enough. So as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to put 3 bars for running from the back to the front. That's going to help support the hood. But I know we're low up there, but I need to get a measurement to see how long these pieces need to be. So I want to come up in front of the hole that's in the top of the hood that you'll see later, and to the back of the angle iron here. And I've got 44 inches. So I'm going to head to the saw, get those cut. We'll come back and put those in place and then figure out our height difference on the end. So I've got the tubing cut that I'm going to use to support the top here. It's 3/4 inch square tubing. As I mentioned earlier, I figured there's about an inch drop off to the front here. So I went ahead and I cut a 1 inch square piece of tubing to the right length to go on top of this front bracket. We'll slide this back into place. And now I can just kind of take a look and eyeball this from the side. And to me, it's looking really good, actually to the point where I'm going to take and tack weld this together. After we do that, we'll flip the hood and we'll start getting the height for the tabletop. Before we get started, warning, read and follow all labels and your owner's manuals. So sometimes when you're building things like this, you rack your brain over thinking about, how am I going to get this put together? What steps do I do it in? What order? And you typically need to think 2 to 3 steps ahead before you finish and then completely weld something in place. So at first I thought about welding this bracket here down to the bracket that's in the hood. But then thinking ahead of how I wanted to support the tabletop on the end, I have 3 pieces of tubing that I want to weld to this plate that will go through the hood. And this plate will then get welded to what would be the top of these 3 pieces underneath the hood here. Well, I won't be able to weld those to this and get it through with these in the way. So this actually has to come back out again. So instead of welding it now, I'm going to clamp it, and then I'll flip the hood, get this set in place, and that'll help me determine the heights on both ends of the steel to make the tabletop flat with the hood. From there, then we can weld things back together. So let's get this clamped, we'll get the hood flipped, and we'll start working on the pieces for here. So now that I have the hood flipped over, what I did was I took that plate and I reached up inside the front here and I got that set up on top of those supports that we put in earlier. So the next step is to figure out how tall the pieces need to be back here and up in front to hold the tabletop up. I want to be above the hood, above the latch here is the highest point, but I want to be as low as possible. So I leveled the hood already so that when I can utilize a level from end to end to get my heights, and everything should be accurate. So what I want to do first is come down here, and off of that angle iron that we put in the beginning, I can measure up, and I'm about 8 3/4 of an inch should clear that latch by maybe 1/4 of an inch, which that would be good for me. So I'm going to get that cut, and then we'll come back and utilizing some shims, we'll get our height measurement for down on this end here. Okay, looking at the bubble, I need to come up quite a bit here yet, so I'm going to slide that in there, and that's looking really good. So we have the back height established already. Now with this level, all I need to do is measure down from that bracket that we put in earlier up to the bottom of the level, and that tells me the height of my front supports. Looks like 8 9/16. So the next step from here is going to be to cut the 3 pieces of tubing that will be up front here to 8 9/16. I'll get the other piece of tubing cut for back here. We'll actually take that plate that's inside there. I'm going to weld all 3 of those pieces of tubing to the plate, bring that back, hold it upside down so the other 2 kind of touch the hood here. And that'll tell me where to drill the holes for that. I'll get those holes drilled. We'll flip this again. If you remember earlier, we did not weld all that bracketry in there to the hood yet. So that'll allow me to pull that out, put that bracket with the tubes in, and then reinstall everything, and then we can weld it all and it'll be one solid piece. So I want to show you a little tip. It's something that I do when I'm building things. I'm by myself and you need an extra hand. Like right here, I have a magnet that's holding this piece of tubing on here. Well, what'll happen is I have the base of the tubing where I want to weld it is centered where I want it, but this magnet doesn't always hold everything at 90 degrees on the side. So as long as I have the base where it needs to be, I'll take something that is 90 degrees, lay it up against the bottom, and you can see here that there's a gap. So what I'll do then is I'll take that side and I'll put my first tack weld down there where this ruler is. And what that'll do is allow me to use that tack weld as a hinge to bring that back, straighten it up, which I can do that by coming to the other side and making sure it's straight, and then I'll finish welding. So when you need an extra hand, use a magnet. I cut these little tabs out. They're 2 inches long, 1 inch wide. Those are going to help hold the framework to the hood supports to give it strength. What I need to do is mark them first so that I can grind the rust off where the tabs will go so I can weld them on there better. So I get my marks, and then I have to take this framework back out again, get it out of the way so I can grind all the paint and the rust off. So now we'll reinstall the framework for the last time. So I took a moment and I turned the welder down because the brackets on the inside of here are thinner gauge material than what I'm welding to on the framework. And I didn't want to burn through, so I just turned it down 1 material thickness. So what I'm going to do next is weld these two, I guess I'll call them the rear supports for the tabletop onto the back here. Once I'm done with that, I have 2 pieces of flat stock. I'll put one here and one up front, and that'll be what the wood tabletop will screw to when it's done. So we'll take care of that, and after that, we'll get working on the legs. So square these up. Okay, so the last step is I'm going to build these legs. I got the framework all set up here on the table. So I'm going to get the framework welded together, and then from there I'll pick the hood back up, flip it upside down on the table, weld the legs underneath the hood, and that'll be the last step of the project. We'll wrap it up by putting the wood top on it. So the table's pretty much done, but it's not in its final resting spot. So I still need to pour concrete out here, put the enclosed porch up, and the beam that you see that the table's against now will move outside versus where it is now. So for now, I'm gonna set the table aside. We're gonna go back in the shop and build 4 antique tractor seat stools to complement this table. So let's get back to the shop and get started. So I need to make a plate for the tractor seat to mount to. So what I'm going to do is cut a 7-inch circle out of this 3/16 inch plate, and then what I'll do is drill a hole in the middle and the tractor seat will bolt to there. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to lay out the side that the legs are gonna mount to on here. So I'm utilizing the center punch hole that I used to cut the circle. And then I also cut out a 7-inch circle out of some construction paper. Now I'm gonna lay that on here, center it the best I can. And I have 3 marks in here that are dividing the circumference of the circle into 3 equal parts. Then what I do is I'll draw a line from the center out to each one. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to use this 1.5-inch tubing for my legs, but instead of coming out flat to the outside of the circle like this, I want to use the pointed section and cut my angle. And then what I can do to make sure each one is straight is line up the point here and here with that line to the center, and I know every single one of these is straight. That'll just help me guide that. So we have those marked. Just come from the center, out. Here we go. So there's my 3 lines. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go drill this center hole out to a 1/2 inch because that's the size of the bolt that's going through. Once that's done, then we'll get our legs cut. So we have the hole drilled into the mounting plate for the tractor seat, and the 3 legs are cut. So now, if you remember, we put these lines on here to help line this tube up because I'm going off of the points. So I'm gonna hold that point here about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then center this one, center that one on the line, center this one. And once I'm close, then we're gonna tack weld it on the inside. And what I'll do is come out here, find my mark, so clamp that down. And that should be good. And we'll get another tack weld out here. And then we're just gonna repeat that for the next 2 legs here. All right, so the legs are on. Next thing I need to do is make a ring for your foot support to rest your feet on. I think what I'm gonna do is take some 3/8-inch round bar, roll it into a ring probably about 16 inches in diameter. So I'm gonna figure out that circumference, we'll measure that out, get the ring roller out, get that rolled, and then we'll come back and make some little brackets that'll weld to the outside of the legs here just to hold that up. So when using that ring roller that I have, you always wind up with the flat spot on the end. So what I do is I typically add on about 4 or 5 inches to what I need for the overall length of the circumference. So for this ring, I needed 50.25 inches. So what I did was I added the 4 to 5 inches on the end, but ahead of time before rolling it, I made a mark on each end of where that circumference begins and ends. So now I can go back, cut this off, I cut the flat spots out, bring that together and weld it, and it should be pretty darn close to the circumference that I calculated. So as I mentioned earlier, I was gonna make some little support brackets to hold that footrest ring onto the stool. What I decided to do was use the same material as the ring, the 3/8 round bar that we have here. So what I'm gonna do, the 2 scraps that I cut off the end, I'm gonna measure 2 inches to utilize some of that. I'll do another 2-inch piece off of here. We'll get those cut, and then we'll get back to mounting that ring onto the legs.